Today, the state of dissent in the UK and US.
You know, US politics is super crazy, and then the UK comes along and says, hold on, look at us. We can match you.
We hear from Mehdi Hasan about his view of our brave new world. I'm Malika Bilal, and this is The Take.
My name is Mehdi Hasan. I'm the editor-in-chief of Zeteo. I'm a journalist, I'm a broadcaster, I'm an author.
Well, Mehdi, welcome to The Take. It's really good to have you here. I am talking to you on Friday, June 26th, after another seismic realignment in UK politics. And of course, I am talking about the launch of Zeteo UK. There was also a prime minister resignation, but
secondary story.
Exactly. I think by now voters there are pretty used to that. So tell us about this moment in UK politics and how Zeteo is taking it in.
Well, we suspected there might be a change in Prime Minister. Keir Starmer has been unpopular for a long time. There's been a lot of talk that he was going to be deposed by Andy Burnham, the mayor of Manchester, who just returned to Parliament. But we didn't know when it would happen. We weren't for sure it would happen anytime soon. And yet, here we go. We launched Zeteo UK, and you have this huge story in the UK. First, we had the by-election, where this Manchester mayor, Andy Burnham, wins this by-election, the most consequential by-election in modern British history, comes back to Parliament, and immediately, before he even challenges Starmer announces his resignation.
Every decision I've taken has been about putting the country I love first. That is why I will resign as leader of the Labour Party. I have spoken to His Majesty the King this morning to inform him of my decision.
So, yeah, as an executive at Substack, the platform we sit on, Zeteo UK sits on Substack, as does Zeteo. As an executive at Substack texted me, great time for a UK Zeteo. Yes, indeed. The timing worked out. We launched Zeteo UK because we want to disrupt the British media just as we've disrupted the American media. We thought this was the right time to do it. That was even before Starmer had resigned. But yes, you've got the Starmer resignation. You've got the return of Andy Burnham. You've got the 10th anniversary of the Brexit referendum, which has shaken up UK politics in ways no one could ever have imagined 10 years ago. You've got the ongoing, situation in Iran, where Britain has been all over the place on. Obviously, the situation in Gaza. You've got the crackdown on pro-Palestine protesters in the UK, the sentencing of protesters at an arms factory with ridiculous sentences. There's a lot going on in UK politics. I keep kind of joking about the fact that, US politics is super crazy, and then the UK comes along and says, hold on, look at us. We can match you.
Exactly. Hold my chai. Isn't the British media market already pretty saturated with left-leaning voices, though? Do you feel like it needed a disruption?
Sadly, that's not true, actually. The British media, I think, is in many ways worse than the American media when it comes to groupthink and bias and prejudice, because it's such a small place. Just geographically. I mean, I worked in the Westminster media bubble for many years. I was the political director at HuffPost UK. I was the political editor at the New Statesman magazine. I moved in those spaces, very, very white spaces, very, very centrist, centre-right spaces, and places where you have a lot of groupthink. Forget left versus right. It was more just about the fact that everyone thinks the same way, talks the same way. It's a small group of people making decisions about what the news headlines are, what the news agenda is, what politics means for the rest of the country, because it's all so focused. And we talk about the Beltway in Washington, D.C., but let's not forget the United States of America is a vast country. It's a continent-sized country. So you can still have patches of independence and free thought and different outlets and different perspectives when you get further away from D.C. In London, it's very hard to get away from London. The entire economy, the entire political system is based around one very small part of the country. So in many ways, it needs more disrupting than the US media. There is The Guardian, great newspaper. I write a column for The Guardian, and there are other outlets, Novara Media, doing great stuff in independent spaces. But there wasn't really a media outlet. When I looked at the British media terrain, where I grew up, where I worked, there wasn't really an outlet that was both shaking things up, but also having an impact. In an anti-establishment way, but in a way that the establishment has to take seriously. Because there are a lot of left-wing voices, but they quickly get marginalized. And that's what happens in the US, in the UK, elsewhere. When you have voices on the left who are doing great journalism, challenging the people in power, it's very easy for the people in power to marginalize these folks. And what we've managed to do successfully with Zeteo here in the US is we've managed to be anti-establishment, but in a way that the establishment takes seriously. We've had impact. We still get big guests. Our coverage still breaks news headlines. And I think that's what we want to do in the UK as well.
Yeah. Okay, well, speaking of the establishment, let's talk about what you wrote a couple of days ago, because we are 10 years after Brexit, and you wrote a piece laying out the case for return, which is it's just hard to say, but you kind of get the hang of it eventually. When the UK voted to leave the European Union 10 years ago, of course, this another seismic shift.
Yes.
And you write, the question is no longer whether Brexit worked. It didn't. The question is whether Britain is prepared to admit it and correct the mistake. So what do you think the answer is?
Yeah, I think it's very important that we acknowledge, as I do in the piece, that countries like individuals can make mistakes, and countries like individuals need to fix those mistakes, acknowledge those mistakes, not just carry on regardless. And I think Britain is in a place now where the British public have clearly come to the position that Brexit was bad. I mean, you look at the polling, it's 2-1 in favor of going back in. It's something like 55 to 35. 55% want to rejoin the EU, 35% want to stay out. The majority for Brexit was always very narrow. I think the referendum famously was 52-48. It was 52 to leave, 48 to remain. That was 10 years ago. As I point out in the piece, that pro-Brexit, anti-EU majority that existed has died out. Like just demographics have done, the big political change. Something like almost 4 million people who voted to leave the EU have died in the last 10 years because people who were anti-EU tended to be older. So, of course, people who supported staying in have also died, but at a much lower rate. So just through sheer time, the Brexit majority has disappeared. And then you have more and more younger voters turning 18, joining the electorate. And the young people have always been more pro-EU. Young people are deeply frustrated that their employment and education prospects have been restricted by Britain being outside of the European Union. So the majority of British public today wants to go back in. And the people who say, well, you can't change this was a democratic mandate, you can't undermine democracy. Well, democracy is not a screenshot. It's not a static moment where you freeze time and say, well, what the British public decided in June 2016, that will be forever. No, the whole point is people get to change their minds. People get to correct mistakes. People get to vote a different way. We don't elect a government and say, never again. That's the one government, one time. Though some people in the world might want to do that. But we try not to do that in democracies.
Yeah. So you kind of raised this, another term, pun intended, was regrexit, which was the blend of regret with Brexit, coined by someone on Twitter back in 2016. And in the piece, you talk about how even Leave voters now say that they want to rejoin the EU. What do you think accounts for that fact?
Yeah, a recent YouGov poll found that 1 in 4 people who voted to leave the European Union now want to rejoin, now think it was a bad thing. That's a big chunk of people, because remember, this is a very polarizing issue. The people who actually hold these views tend to hold them very strongly. So 1 in 4 is a lot of people. If you think that many people have changed their minds in just a decade. But look, I say in the piece, it's not surprising when people see with their own eyes, hear with their own ears what is happening, see in their own lives the damage caused by Britain withdrawing from the EU, the economic damage that was done in terms of slower growth, in terms of higher prices, wages and employment did not shoot up as we were told they would. Many lies were told that the National Health Service would improve because more money would be available for healthcare once we pull out of the EU. That was a lie. Nigel Farage disowned that literally hours after they won the referendum. So people saw this with their own eyes. And the good thing about the UK still, despite my criticism of the media, is there's still a reality-based community. It's not like the US, where Donald Trump can do crazy shit and his supporters will say, well, that's not true, it didn't happen, fake news. I think in the UK there's still a sense where people can go, all right, fine, the evidence does suggest Brexit was bad. It's not like here where we close our eyes to any evidence that we don't agree with in our kind of echo chambers. So in that sense, that probably is what explains it, is that some Leave voters are not all crazy, are not all ideologues, are not all in a cult, and they're like, okay, I voted for this thinking Boris Johnson and Michael Gove and others and Nigel Farage told me this would be great. Clearly it hasn't been great. Clearly the British economy is not doing amazing. Clearly British society is deeply divided. Clearly the British public is in a very demoralized place. I visit the UK 2-3 times a year, and I've seen over the last 10 years, just as a general sense of disillusionment and demoralization across the country. And I think people have seen that.
Yeah. I had to write down, the UK is still a reality-based community, which feels like a dig, but I will remind our viewers and listeners that you are now an American.
I am speaking to you from the United States. I'm an American citizen. I'm a dual national since 2020. But sometimes I was doing a podcast with Trevor Noah recently. He said, when did you start saying we about American? I was like, I don't know the answer to that. But I do sometimes take off American hat and put a British hat on and vice versa to make my pundit points.
Well, I want you to put your American hat on because I want to shift to the fact that the UK is not the only so-called democracy in decline, as we know very well here in the US, but maybe there is hope. I'm talking about the energy around the primary elections happening in the run-up to the midterms, which take place in November, most recently in New York, where a slew of candidates backed by the Democratic Socialists of America are set to take office. What did you make of those victories?
Yeah, pretty astonishing. A reminder of a couple of things. Well, three things I think they're a reminder of. Number one, the Democratic Party base is in a very different place to the party leadership and establishment when it comes to multiple issues, not just Israel. I know we talk a lot about Israel, but healthcare, climate, taxing the rich. This is the Democratic Party base is to the left of where the leadership is. Number two, AIPAC and forces aligned with AIPAC, pro-Israel lobby groups, don't have the power they once had. I mean, they still have power. Let's not be clear. They've still managed to defeat certain candidates in certain places, but not always. And I think we saw that in New York where it was, 3 for 3, where these lefty candidates who were endorsed by Mamdani all won. And number three, the Mamdani factor. We now have, we ran a piece from Ryan Cooper for Zeteo this week making the point that he is now the Democratic Party's kingmaker. This guy who, couldn't even get endorsed by Chuck Schumer last year when he ran for mayor and won, couldn't even get the Democratic top leadership to endorse him, is now the guy deciding who's going to Congress, who's going to be in Hakeem Jeffries' caucus. Hakeem Jeffries took so long to come out and endorse him. Now Mamdani is deciding who will be the members of Congress. That's a pretty powerful position to be in.
I'm incredibly excited to have endorsed 8 candidates, 5 at the state level, 3 at the federal level, and to have seen every single one of those candidates win last night. And what their successes represent is a shift in the balance of power between working people and special interests.
And look, 2028 is not far away. We know that Zoran Mamdani, unfortunately, cannot run for president. If he could, he would be one of the front runners already, obviously. But he can be a kingmaker. He's made that very clear in recent days.
Yeah. I'll add, you mentioned the list of things he couldn't get during his run-up, his campaign. One of those things way back when was also he couldn't get his time to relax after an interview with you because he had to get ushered out in favor of Hassan Minhaj. So you got a chance to interview him before he was
right
this,
at the beginning. Yeah, it's very embarrassing. I shared that story recently about how he was at less than 1% in the polls. He was a nobody. I didn't know who he was. This was December 2024. He had just declared his candidacy outsider, and Cuomo was at 20-30 point lead in the polls, and one of my producers was like, we should get this guy on, he's from Queens, he's a socialist, give him a platform. I said, all right, he's a brown dude, socialist, let's try. And Zoran Mamdani, Democrat and Democratic Socialist, is running for mayor of New York. He joins me now. Thank you for coming on Mehdi Unfiltered.
Thank you so much for having me.
So why are you running for mayor, and why now at the age of 34, I believe?
I'm running for mayor to make this city more affordable for working class New Yorkers.
And it was the same day I was interviewing Hassan Minhaj for a podcast. I was like, well, make sure he's gone. We don't want to run over. The main interview is Hassan Minhaj, not this, what's his name, Zoran Mamdani? So I hold my hands up and I say, look, I got that wrong. And I told him this to his face. I said, look, that first interview I did with you, that was a pity interview. How foolish I was. You didn't need my pity at all. He then went on to win the primary. He then went on to win the general. I've interviewed him a couple of times since. I hope he's forgiven me.
It makes for a great story. But it does help me pivot to journalism, because all of this is happening at a time when journalism in the U.S. is under attack. Reporters Without Borders called President Trump the single biggest threat to press freedom today, but said there are structural issues that are deeper. You had a front row seat to many of those issues throughout your career, which ultimately led you to launch Zeteo. So do independent journalists get us out of this?
No, not on our own. I don't want to overstate the case for independent journalism. I think independent journalism is vital in this moment of growing fascism at home and ongoing genocide in the Middle East. It's independent journalists who've been telling the truth to their readers and listeners and viewers and subscribers about what is happening in the Middle East without fear of pro-Israel lobby groups who've been able to say what's happening in America without having to worry about the BS both sides coverage that a lot of mainstream media organizations adopt. So I think independent journalism has a vital role to play right now at a time when the corporations that own the big mainstream media outlets, the Disneys and the Comcasts and obviously Foxes are rolling over, and obviously CBS, Paramount, David Ellison are all either rolling over for Donald Trump or enthusiastically cheering him on. So I think independent journalism has never been more vital. However, independent journalism cannot get us out of this mess. on our own. We do need the mainstream media to step up. We do need quote unquote establishment journalists to do their jobs because there's a future where people stop watching cable, but they haven't yet stopped watching cable. MSNBC, CNN, Fox still do play a role in influencing the political discourse in this country. And let's not forget, the New York Times, Washington Post still have great reporters doing great reporting. They still have foreign bureaus that Zeteo certainly can't afford right now, that independent journalists can't afford to staff right now. So I think big media organizations, obviously Al Jazeera, not an American organization, but has a huge presence globally. Big media organizations, mainstream media organizations, establishment media have to really step up to this moment because if they don't, then we will go full fascist in countries like America and France and the UK. Because if the media is not doing its job and asking important questions and holding the powerful to account, then that's one of our last barriers between democracy and non-democracy.
Yeah. Well, finally, then I'd like to get you on the record about this because, we did an episode during another era of media layoffs. And I heard a quote that stuck with me with one of my interviewees. If you're 99% sure you want to do journalism, you should do something else. Basically, the point being that this was always a challenging industry, but
Yes.
It is safe to say that this period is particularly hard. So what do you tell people taking a long, hard look at our industry and deciding if they want to join the fight or if it's just time to walk away?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's no easy answer to that question. The media industry is in a bad way in terms of the economics of journalism. The advertiser-funded models are no longer working in the social media age where Google and Meta suck up all the ads, and you have local papers, small papers going bust because they can't survive anymore on ad revenue. The alternative to ad revenue is having billionaire owners, which has its own problems, as I've already laid out. And independent journalism like us, we're doing what we can, but it's fighting a battle that yes can look like a losing battle, but we keep fighting. It's a good question you ask about advice. I speak to a lot of crowds, audiences. I do a lot of live events. I travel across the country. And a lot of young people do ask me questions. And a lot of parents of young people ask me questions. Should our kids go become journalists? And especially when I talk to Muslim crowds or brown crowds or minority audiences. There were 10, 15 years ago, I was very rah, rah, rah. Like, you should all be journalists. We need more people. Stop just being doctors. Try and be a journalist. We need more of you in the media fighting the good fight. I'm not rah, rah, rah anymore. I'm much more skeptical and I'm much more cautious in the advice I give from the podium to crowds, because I do think we should have more brown and black people in the media. I do think we should have more progressives in the media. I do think we should have more people in the media who want to tell the truth and not just roll over for big business and fascists. But, and here's the but, as you say, you got to go in eyes wide open. You got to know that you're going to fight battles that can be losing battles. You got to know that, especially if you're brown and black, and especially if you're a brown, black female, you are going to face the kind of bigotry and harassment and demonization and dehumanization and maybe even doxing, God forbid, that we're seeing so many people in our industry face right now. It's a very vicious industry right now. It's a very vicious political climate. So it's a tricky one for me. I do want more people to join the good fight. I run a business. I'm looking for good journalists, always young people, up and coming people, future stars. But at the same time, I can't, as a parent, for example, I can't just lie to other parents and say, it'll be great. Your kids will be famous and rich and powerful and influential and they'll love it and they'll hang out with celebs. That's not the case for most journalists, especially journalists starting out right now in 2026. And of course, in the US, you're putting a target on your back. Donald Trump has arrested journalists, raided the homes of journalists, stopped journalists at airports, threatened journalists, threatened to sue journalists, threatened to imprison journalists. So I think this is a very dangerous climate. But look, having said all that, I can't tell people don't become journalists either, because I am one and I'm not quitting. I'm not giving up the fight. So therefore, come join the fight. But yes, I like the phrasing you use. Come join it if you're 100% ready to have this fight. If you are, we need you.
Mehdi Hasan, thank you so much for this conversation and for the rallying cry. I'm listening. We're listening. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me on The Take, for all the great work you've done.